and welcome to our first Crafternoon video. Today we're going to be knitting a pumpkin, and for this project you'll need yarn, a pair of knitting needles, a small yarn sewing needle, so it's got a bigger eye than a regular sewing needle, a pipe cleaner or a stick or a cinnamon stick, something to use for the stem of the pumpkin, pair of scissors, and some stuffing. So this is a really easy knitting project if you are a beginner knitter. It's just going to be a 1x3 rib with knits and purls, and I'm going to put some links in the description to some really good beginner knitting tutorial videos if you need to learn how to cast on or how to knit stitch or purl stitch or how to read a knitting pattern. But we're going to start. This is pretty thin yarn, so what I'm actually going to do is I'm pulling the yarn from the middle of the yarn and also the outside, and I'm going to double up. So I'm going to be knitting 2 pieces of yarn at once. And this is a nifty little trick if your yarn is really thin, if you buy the cheap stuff like I do, and you want to still have a nice full product. So to start your cast on, you're going to take your yarn, loop it. It's hard to see with my big fingers in the way of everything. And then take that tail and kind of twist it all into a little pretzel shape, and then hold it at the joint of the pretzel. Take one of your knitting needles and slide it through just the one loop, and then pull, and you should have created a slip knot, so then you can tighten it up on your knitting needle. And the easiest way to cast on, so to get the stitches on your needle, is to loop the yarn behind your thumb, kind of twist it around so you have a loop on your finger, and then drop that loop on your needle and pull it kind of tight. So pull back with the thumb, twist around the finger to make a loop, and put the loop on the needle. And you're going to do that until you have 18 stitches. Actually, we're going to do a medium-sized pumpkin. Do 24 stitches on your needle. And once you've got all your 24 stitches cast on, it's time to start knitting. So to knit, I'm going to scooch closer to the camera because I can't hold my needles out this far. You're going to switch hands, so whatever your dominant hand is, that should have the empty needle, and your secondary hand should have the needle with all the stitches on it. You're going to take your needle and stick it in the loop behind your needle with all the stitches on it. Pick up that yarn, twist it around your thumb, kind of like when we were casting on, and then stick that on the needle. Then you're going to use your back needle to pull that loop off. And then you're going to do it again. So you'll insert behind, pull a little tighter, loop, and put it on your needle. So this pattern is going to be knit 3, purl 1. So that's 1, 2, 3 stitches we knit. Now it's time to purl. So to purl, I'm going to flip my yarn so it's on my side. I'm going to put my needle with fewer stitches in front in the loop, and then I'm going to loop the yarn onto the needle, pull it through, and pull the loop off. So that's 1 purl. Then I'm going to switch back to knit. I'm going to knit 3, 2, 3, and then I'm going to purl 1. knit, 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 purl. Knit, 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 purl. And I've gotten pretty decent at knitting because my grandma taught me how to do it when I was 8. So it might take you a while to get this quick if you're a beginner. It might also take you a while before you can knit without looking at your knitting, and that's totally fine. Knit, 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 and then my last stitch is a purl. Okay, now I'm gonna switch my hands again. So the needle with all the stitches on it is going to be in my left hand again. Empty needle is going to be in my right hand. And this time I'm going to purl 3 and then knit 1. And what that's going to do is make it so that the stitches look the same on the front and the back. So I'm going to move my yarn to the front toward me. I'm going to put my needle in the front and I'm going to purl, 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 knit, purl, purl. Oops, gotta scooch my stitches up a little bit. Purl, knit, purl, 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 knit, purl, 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 scooch my stitches, knit. Oop, I'm getting a little twisted up there. Purl, 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 knit, purl, 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 knit. And then I'm going to do it all again. So I'll switch my needles and then I'm gonna knit 3, purl 1 till I get to the end of this. And then I'll flip it around and I will purl 3, knit 1. And I'm gonna keep doing that until I get a rectangle that is about 5 inches long. So there should be about 5 inches worth of knit hanging off of my needles. And if you forget the pattern, I'm gonna put a link to the pattern in the description as well. And sometimes if you're talking or doing other things like watching Netflix or whatever while you knit, you might lose track of your stitches, so you can always go back and count them. So 1, 2, 3, that's a knit, and a purl, knit, 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 purl, knit. So I got 2 more knits, and then a purl. That happens to me all the time, especially when I'm trying to explain what I'm doing while I'm doing it. Knit, knit, purl, knit, 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 purl. And this pumpkin, because it's such a simple stitch with this 1x3 rib, is a really good way to practice your knitting, and it's a pretty forgiving thing too. So if you drop a stitch or get one wrong or whatever, it's not really going to matter too much. So it's a great activity for beginners. Plus, who doesn't love a pumpkin? 3. And then once you've mastered your knit and your purl, you can use this for all kinds of stuff. You can use it for scarves, for hats, especially with the way we're gonna stitch this up at the end. That's how I make hats a lot. It's like the super easy way to do it. So you don't have to worry about knitting in the round or whatever. And then you can make some really cool gifts. And once you've really, really mastered it and you want to learn new stitches, we have plenty of knitting books in the library, and there are plenty of videos out there that you can find as well to learn new stitches and apply your knitting skills to bigger and better challenges. So I've got a little bit knit here now, and like I said earlier, I want this to be about 5 inches, and I don't have a ruler, which was silly of me, but a good rule of thumb, if you'll pardon the pun, is that your thumb from the tip to that first knuckle there is about 1 inch. So if I measure I put my other needle down, 1 thumb, 2 thumbs, 3 thumbs, 4 thumbs, and a half. I'm almost there, so I just have a little bit more to do. And I'm pretty happy with how far I've gotten. So now I'm gonna cast off, which is gonna be the process of getting my knitting off of my needle. So I'm going to knit 1, and then I'm gonna knit another. So I've got 2 knit stitches on this needle, and then I'm going to put my front needle with all the stitches on it into the front of the second loop. It's hard to get a good image of this, so I'll link to some good cast off videos in the description also. And then I'm gonna pull through and drop that stitch. Well, not drop it, but secure it. And then I'm gonna knit another 1. So I've got 2 on my needle again. And then knit and pull through. Knit, pull through, oops, knit, pull it through. I'm going to keep going like this until I have no stitches left. And you don't have to go till this is, oops, there's the bell. You don't have to go till this is 5 inches long. You can make it longer, you can make it shorter. It's just gonna change the shape of your pumpkin a little bit, but that's totally fine because who needs a uniform pumpkin patch, right? Channel a little bit of Bob Ross and just do what feels good. Decide for yourself what you want your pumpkin to look like. Still just casting off here. Almost done. Okay, so now I've got my one stitch left. I've kind of pulled it tight a little bit. Now I'm done with these. I'm gonna put them back in my handy little case. As a side note, if you have your own knitting needles and you wanna know how to make a case like this, I made it out of duct tape. It took me like 5 minutes. So there is a link in the description for the video on how to make a knitting needle case too. That's one of the reasons I love crafts. It always makes me kind of tap into my creative mind a little bit more, and then I can come up with solutions to things that might otherwise have been difficult for me to figure out. So I'm gonna pull some extra yarn here. It's, I don't know, maybe 2 feet-ish. And then I'm gonna go ahead and cut it loose. And get my yarn sewing needle. I wanna make sure this loop doesn't come undone, so I'm gonna take my yarn tail and pull it through there. Just like that. And then my finished piece should look kind of like the cuff of a sweater. So it's a rib knit, and it's a 3x1 rib. So I've got my 1, 2, 3 here, and then the 1. And I want to turn it, or I'm going to fold it in half so that the 3-piece ridges are facing each other. So this is what the other side looks like. So I want this on the outside right now. And I'm going to take one of those yarn tails, thread it through my needle, just a little bit, so there's a little tail on it. With my yarn block folded together, I'm going to take that needle and I'm just going to stitch up the side to sew these two side edges of my rectangle together. So I am putting the needle through a loop on this side and then through a loop on that side. So this is a really good way to practice sewing too, if you have not done much sewing. This is again a really easy forgiving project. If you make mistakes, it's okay if it's not perfect. I'll just sew up the side there. And if you don't know exactly where to put the needle through, that's okay too. Just make sure you get a little bit of yarn on each side edge there. All the way through to the end. And then I'm going to do a gathering stitch. So now I have a tube of yarn. And I'm gonna do a gathering stitch all around this circular part here. And what that means is I'm gonna take my needle and I'm gonna thread it in and then pull it out, thread it back in, thread it through, and I'm just gonna keep pulling it tight as I go. Because basically what I wanna do is just tighten the bottom of this tube up so that the stuffing that I'm eventually gonna put in the bottom of this can't get out. And I didn't do that as best I could. I've got kind of a little extra edge here. So I'm gonna go around just one more time and make sure I get a nice, really substantial gathered spot there. And then once I've got that tight, I can kind of flip it inside out to check and make sure, yep, there's no hole in the bottom anymore. So on my side that I'm sewing, I'm gonna take my needle off the yarn. I'm gonna tie the tails that were there and my excess sewing yarn together in a knot a couple of times. This doesn't have to be pretty. This is gonna be the inside of the pumpkin. I'm gonna put stuffing on top of it in a minute. And once I'm sure it's nice and secure, then I'm going to trim the ends off. And at this point, this is basically a little hat, right? Like, I made one of these at home a couple weeks ago and I turned it inside out like this and I put it on my cat. She wasn't super excited, but I took a very cute picture of her. So if you wanted to use this skill to make a hat instead, that's kind of where you would stop. But we're making a pumpkin, not a hat. So I've turned it back right side out. So I've got that 3-part ridge on the outside now and the little 1-part valley. I'm gonna take some of my stuffing and just cram it in there. And you can stuff your pumpkin as much or as little as you like. Again, it's totally up to you what this pumpkin ends up looking like. That was a pretty good amount of stuffing. So then I'm gonna take this tail, do the exact same thing to the top that I did to the bottom, thread that into my needle, and I'm gonna go around and gather up the top of this pumpkin. We're almost done. A couple more steps. All right, so I've got the top gathered. It's not completely gathered, I'm leaving a little hole there. I'm gonna set my pumpkin aside for a second and grab my pipe cleaner. If you get one of the kits from the library, it'll have pipe cleaners in it. You can also use cinnamon sticks. I've done a couple like that. It's kind of a cute look and it makes it sort of fragrant. You can also just use sticks that you find outside. That works too, gives it a little more organic feel. But since I did a maroon pumpkin, I'm gonna use a gold pipe cleaner for a stem, because who doesn't want a Trojan pumpkin? And I'm just gonna fold my pipe cleaner sort of roughly into thirds to make it a little bit thicker. Twist it so it stays together. So this is my triple twisted pipe cleaner, and I'm gonna put it in that opening of my pumpkin. I'm gonna kind of bend it a little bit for flavor. And then I'm going to pull that gather tight all the way. And I'm going to stitch it up just a little bit more to make sure that pipe cleaner's in there securely. Actually, before I do that, I think I'm going to double my pipe cleaner up one more time because it's looking a little appley. That's not what I'm after. Make that stem a little bit thicker. Put that there. Stitch around a little more. Then I'm going to tie a knot around my pipe cleaner. Then I'm going to take the yarn out of the needle, set my needle to the side, and I'm going to take that extra yarn and find those valleys. They've expanded a little bit, so it's a little harder to find, but find those valleys and then pull the yarn around, loop it around that pipe cleaner, find another valley, pull that yarn around, I don't have quite enough yarn, so I'm going to pause there for a second so I can cut off more yarn to add to this. So I just tied on a little excess yarn there. And then I've got one more set of valleys to go in and around my pumpkin. And then I'm gonna loop this yarn around my pipe cleaner. This is hard to do up high on camera. And I'm going to loop the yarn around. Pull it into a knot. Off camera, I'm going to tie another better knot. So I've tied my extra yarn, secured it around that little pipe cleaner. I'm going to trim that off. And voila, knitted pumpkin. You can zhuzh it up a little bit with some extra green yarn around your stem if you want. You can make them in all different colors. You know, it's really, the sky's the limit with this project. But that's how you do it. Thanks for joining me for this Crafternoon.